The year is 793 AD, the 8th day of June, on the holy island of Lindisfarne, off the coast of Northumbria. The monks had finished their morning prayers and were tending to their daily chores. When they saw dragon-headed ships appearing on the horizon, they thought it was merely a passing merchant fleet. They were wrong. As the waves crashed against the shore, giants stepped off the shipsmen carrying axes and gleaming shields. They hadn't come to pray. What happened at Lindisfarne that day was not just a raid, it was the birth of an era. Monks were put to the sword, sacred gold and silver were plundered, and the Christian world was left in a state of absolute shock. Who could commit such atrocities against the house of God? This event was etched into history as the official start of the Viking Age. But today, we are going to look beyond the image of the ruthless pirate. We will explore the culture, the technology, and the spirit of discovery that these ships carried. They were not just raiders. They were the masters of the North. The homeland of the Vikings was Scandinavia, modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. This is one of the most breathtaking yet brutal geographies on Earth. Steep fjords, barren mountains, and freezing winters. Contrary to popular belief, the primary reason Vikings took to the seas wasn't just a thirst for war. It was a struggle for survival. As the population grew, the narrow valleys could no longer sustain them. Going Viking became a necessity and a profession. To understand Viking society, we must look inside their homes rather than their helmets. Their society was built on a strict but remarkably fair hierarchy. At the top were the jarls, the nobility. Beneath them were the carlsfree farmers, merchants, and master craftsmen. At the bottom were the thralls, or slaves. However, what separated the Vikings from their contemporaries was their public assemblies. In these meetings, the powers of the king were debated, criminals were judged, and most importantly, laws were decided in front of the people. While the rest of Europe languished under absolute monarchies, these barbarians were laying the foundations of democracy. The status of women was a revolution for the time. A Viking woman managed the entire farm and economy while her husband was at sea. She could own property, inherit wealth, and surprisingly, she could sue for divorce if her husband mistreated her. Legends of shield maidens suggest that women even fought shoulder to shoulder with men on the battlefield, proving their strength was equal to their spirit. What made a Viking warrior smile in the face of death? The answer lies within their massive mythological universe. They believed the universe consisted of 9 realms, all nestled within the branches of a giant world tree called Yggdrasil. Our world, Midgard, was just a tiny fragment of these branches. At the peak was Odin, the Allfather. Odin had sacrificed an eye for wisdom and hung himself from the world tree for 9 days. He was the god of war, but also of wisdom and poetry. Beside him was the mighty Thor, protector of humanity and wielder of thunder. Opposing them was Loki, the master of mischief. Every Viking knew that everything had an end. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, where even the deities themselves would perish. For a warrior, the ultimate goal was not to die of old age in bed, but to die with a sword in hand on the battlefield. Dying of old age, what they called straw death, would lead them to the cold and dark realm of Helheim. But those who died heroically were chosen by the Valkyries and taken to Odin's great hall, Valhalla. There, they would fight all day and feast all night until the coming of Ragnarok. This fearless of death philosophy made Viking armies the most effective psychological force in history. To them, death wasn't an end. It was the ultimate promotion. The secret weapon that allowed Vikings to conquer the known world was not their swords, but their ships. The Drakkar, or longship, was the pinnacle of medieval engineering. These ships were clinker-built, meaning the planks overlapped and were riveted together. This gave the ship incredible flexibility. In the face of the Atlantic's wild waves, these ships didn't break. They flexed with the water. More importantly, these ships had a shallow draft. A Viking ship could float in water as shallow as 50 to 60 centimeters. This design gave them a priceless advantage, the ability to navigate rivers. The great cities of Europe felt safe because they were miles inland, but the Vikings could appear in the middle of a river overnight, right at the city walls. Paris, London, and even Seville experienced this shock firsthand, using sunstones to find the sun on cloudy days and reading the flight of birds. They navigated thousands of miles before the compass was ever invented. They didn't just sail the sea, they lived through its soul. By the mid-9th century, small-scale raids evolved into massive invasions. The most famous name of this era is undoubtedly Ragnar. Whether Ragnar was a single man or a composite of many leaders is still debated, but his impact is undeniable. Legend says Ragnar was captured in England by King El and thrown into a pit of poisonous snakes. His final words were prophetic: how the young piglets will grunt when they hear how the old boar suffered. Those piglets were Ivar, the boneless, Bjorn Ironside, and Ub. The great heathen army they raised to avenge their father changed the course of English history. They toppled Anglo-Saxon kingdoms one by one. Ivar's strategic genius and Bjorn's physical prowess made the Vikings landowners, not just raiders. Today, many place names and linguistic structures in England stem from the Danois region established during that time. To the south, another giant emerged, Rollo. He besieged Paris so effectively that the king of the West Franks offered him land in exchange for stopping the attacks. This land became known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. Rollo's descendants would eventually blend Viking spirit with French culture and go on to conquer England in 1066 as the Normans. Vikings were not just warriors, they were mappers of the unknown. Brave ships heading west first discovered Iceland, where they established the Althing, the oldest parliament in Europe. But this wasn't enough. Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for murder, sailed further west and found habitable land amidst the ice. He named it Greenlander, bit of a marketing strategy to attract settlers to the Greenland. The real miracle happened around 1000 AD. Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson, set foot on the North American continent 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Archaeological remains at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland prove that Vikings built villages there, forged iron, and lived in this new world they called Vinland. If not for conflicts with the indigenous people, the Skrallings, and the immense logistical challenges, we might be speaking a very different American history today. The Vikings didn't just head west, their roots extended east, toward the rising sun. Swedish Vikings, known as the Russ, traveled down the Dnieper and Volga rivers. They founded the Rus Khaganate, the foundation of the modern Russian and Ukrainian states. Their journey led them to the heart of the world, Constantinople. The Vikings called this city Miklagard, the Great City. The Byzantine Emperor was so impressed by these massive, fearless warriors that he formed a personal bodyguard unit from them, the Varangian Guard. They were the most loyal and highest paid soldiers in the empire. If you look at the marble railings on the upper floor of the Hagia Sophia today, you can still see the runes carved by a Viking soldier named Halfdan, who was simply bored during guard duty. It says, Halfdan was here. The Vikings had come not just to destroy it but to serve in the most magnificent palaces in history. Like every storm, the Viking Age eventually had to calm. By the 11th century, the world was changing. European kingdoms had built stronger armies and fortified their defenses with stone castles. But the real change happened in the Viking soul, Christianity. What could not be done with the sword was done with the cross. Viking kings converted to be part of the European political system. In 1066, the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada landed in England to claim the throne with the last great Viking army. However, he was defeated and killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. This date is considered the end of the Viking Age. The dragon-headed ships no longer inspired terror. The Vikings didn't disappear. They settled, they integrated, and they became the genetic and cultural map of modern Europe. The savage image we have of Vikings today hides the fact that they laid the foundations of the modern world. From English words like Thursday, Thorsday, to maritime terminology, from the quest for democracy to the urge to explore the furthest horizons, their legacy is everywhere. They were a people who listened to the wind, understood the stars, and said, wherever fate finds you, go there with your head held high. Valhalla may be a legend today, but the wake left by those fearless sailors still washes against our shores. If you were rowing a Viking ship, would you steer toward the unknown of America or the splendor of Constantinople? Let us know in the comments.